Allie, the whole concept of nutrition and dieting is so confusing.
It's very confusing and it can almost make you want to just throw in the towel. But don't do that, because today we have Dr. Joe Klemczewski on the show, who is known as the Godfather of Flexible Dieting. He actually pioneered the method of macro tracking that has become popular on social media, and he's also the owner of the Diet Doc, and he's going to help us understand all the ins and outs of food.
And before we dive in, let's give a shout out to our listener, Karen McCallan. Thanks for listening. Now let's dive in.
Welcome to the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, where we dive deep into pressing health and fitness issues facing aging women. I'm Alli Kerr.
And I'm Shawna Klemczewski. And together we'll bring candid conversations, expert advice, and personal stories that will inspire and empower you on your own wellness journey.
I am super excited to have Dr. Joe Klemczewski with us today, who has been a huge influence in my life and my knowledge of nutrition. And I am so thankful that we have him here to share with our listeners so he can teach us all a little bit more about nutrition. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Joe.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this.
Well, I'm super excited. And I want to know, because we have some people, me included, this used to be me before I met you, Dr. Joe, I was so confused about nutrition. And let's start really basic. What do women need to understand first about what's macros, what's protein, carbs, and fat? Can we start there?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because when I got involved with consulting and teaching almost 30 years ago, that really was an unknown quantity. Everybody up to that point, mid 90s, late 90s, was so conditioned just to follow the latest diet book, whatever was out there. And when I was in college and was very interested in nutrition, I was facing some of my own confusion or just trying to find my way with, here are my athletic goals, yet I'm a poor college kid who's working 3 or 4 jobs at a time, and I just can't do the quote diets that some other people were proposing. So with some of my physiology background already in school and so forth, I just was asking these questions. What makes this diet this diet? What makes this diet special? And I started just reverse engineering, what they're asking for, how much protein, carbs, and fat, why are they doing it this way versus that way? So I'm already kind of investigating some of the research and was a little bit shocked to find out that it really was not based on much research. Like most people were creating these types of nutrition plans and diets just based on marketing hype. Whatever was not happening, that was the opportunity point. So I looked at what good nutrition really was and why. How do you stack up all of the research and kind of rank good, better, best? And then it was easy to say, well, if this is what they're really asking for, this much protein, carbs, and fat, I'm just going to approach it like a budget. And with good health values, I'm not tracking my carbs and my fat just to see how many Twinkies or donuts I can eat in a day, but I really have these health goals and these physique sport, performance sport goals. So I just reverse engineered it and decided, okay, this is the kind of food quantity they were asking for. And so I did that, and it kind of opened up this whole world of flexibility. Well, now I can approach it like a budget. If I have classes this day and working this day, and I need to kind of combine these meals or delay a snack. And so it ended up becoming just a very, accounting based method. But as I was doing it for myself and finding out how it really did just open up all kinds of endless opportunities for success. I can now eat what I want, when I want, how I want, as long as the quantity objectively was measured in some way, because now I can compare that to my actual results. Am I losing weight fast enough or how I wanted to? So around that time, maybe a year or two of doing that is when I started writing for a lot of the top fitness magazines. I started the physique sport coaching industry And so now all of a sudden other coaches are learning from me. I'm writing these magazine articles. This was before social media. And so, that's how we had to get our information. But to this day, that's the beginning point. That's the genesis story of how macronutrient tracking began. Now, flash forward 30 years. And what I find is most people, instead of saying, I've never heard of that, teach me, like, wow, this is fascinating. This is unbelievable, freedom, that this gives me food freedom. I can eat the foods I want, when I want, and the amounts I want. Now, everybody's been there, done that. Everybody's tracked macros. They've got MyFitnessPal. They've done things like that. And now they're coming full circle back to saying, I've done that before. I don't like tracking. I don't like weighing and measuring food. Just tell me what to eat. So now people are kind of circling back to wanting meal plans and more structure. So I find myself a little bit in the middle saying, structure's good. We still, meal plans are helpful. And if your schedule allows for some stability like that, great. But you're still going to need to know how to introduce flexibility at some level some of the time. So let's see if we can marry those two things together for your best outcome.
And I feel like it's kind of like when you're educating about what macronutrients are, which is just proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. It's like giving you the fishing pole rather than just the fish. I'm a big advocate of understanding what you're eating and why, but there is the need, because a lot of people get analysis paralysis. They are like, okay, I need to get 100 grams of protein, but what does a meal look like? So
and with macronutrient tracking, even the folks that use MyFitnessPal, clients that I've had, when they come, until they're taught what proteins, carbs, and fats are, even though they might be using MyFitnessPal, they still don't understand about proteins, carbs, and fats, and what that looks like and what their balance is. And sometimes we know that, those things are only as accurate as what you put in them, the input. And so there's that part of, and we don't want to confuse people in this podcast. The goal is I think the macros maybe are, if you don't have a coach to work with you and explain it, it can be a little bit much for people. And maybe that's why we're seeing that, influencers might be talking about macronutrients, but then when this person watching this goes and tries to do it, they just still don't. There's a disconnect between their understanding and what they're maybe even seeing. Are you seeing that? Or
you are exactly right. Initially it looks like, oh, it's just math. That's easy. But then you get into the practicality of, well, I have to have the foods available. So maybe that involves a little meal prep, or I need to have certain foods available at my office versus my home. And then it all goes out the window when you go out to eat and you don't know what to order, or you think you're ordering well and you don't realize you just had 120 grams of fat in a salad that you thought was healthy. So there is a lot that goes into it that coaching can help. And I'll give you a couple good examples just from this week with some clients of mine. A female who is, really aggressively trying to lose body fat, get as lean as possible. And she's done extremely well, but we're kind of down to the wire in terms of she doesn't have much body fat left to lose. And so it's just a little bit slower. She fell into the trap of thinking, well, I'll just have all of my carbohydrate sources from vegetables, because you can obviously eat more. A cup of lettuce versus a cup of starch, you can eat 10 cups of lettuce. But what she didn't realize, because she doesn't have the physiological background, is insoluble fiber still, when it gets down to your large intestine, is metabolized by anaerobic bacteria, which converts it to fat, goes right through your liver, the hepatic portal system, and you don't get the anabolic or metabolic benefits of the actual carbs. And so she's wrecking her gut. Her digestive health is horrible right now, and she's not losing weight. And if you take those same amount of total carbs, redistribute them back into some starch, an appropriate level of vegetable fiber, but also maybe some soluble fiber from things like fruits, all of a sudden digestion improves, your GI system's fine. And even on, quote, the same amount of carbohydrates, you're back to losing body fat. So that's a quality issue, not just quantity, that a lot of people may not understand. And I realize that was a lot of technical information, but it just goes to show how layer upon layer upon layer upon layer you can view nutrition. And most people just don't realize how little they know.
If I could just clarify, this was likely a physique athlete.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that the majority of people, I just don't want I don't want anyone to hear that message and say, vegetables are bad. I've got to cut back on vegetables. So this particular person was eating only fibrous vegetables and none of the starchy carbs like potatoes and rice, that sort of thing. So just
and my advice would be the same even for somebody not involved in a sport like that, because the same thing happens. I also happen to know a gentleman who got roped into thinking ketogenic dieting is the way to go. So he won't have any carbs whatsoever except for the fibrous carbs. And here's a guy who's 6'4", 300 pounds. He's lost 100 pounds. He's not doing any kind of physique sport or performance sport. And yet he's doing the same thing as this female I was talking about. And I had to tell him, look, I mean, congratulations that you've done so well and you've been committed to such a hard diet, but the failure rate is the highest. Like your potential for recidivism, gaining all this weight back, and now with less metabolic capacity, with less lean body mass, is so high. So my advice to him was the same. Like, we got to take some of that vegetable fiber and redistribute it into some starch and some fruit and so forth. So it's just one of those hot topic, Shawna, because everybody's into paleo or carnivore or keto of some level, and thinking that all starch, all sugar is horrible. And it's just one of those myths that I sure wish could die.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that makes me think about fueling versus restricting, because that's sometimes the mindset, and not whether it's about vegetables versus, what kind of carbs we're eating, but just in general, women, our mindset has been that we need to restrict in order to lose weight. And one of the questions that I ask my ladies is, why do we even eat? What's the purpose? Like, why do we need food? And so could you speak to that as far as like why eating enough and fueling our bodies is important, especially as us that are aging women?
Mm-hmm. That is something I'm going to kind of address as two sides of the same coin, because another horrific, highly damaging myth is the coach or the influencer who says, well, the reason you're not losing weight is you're not eating enough. You got to eat. And I see a lot of coaches talk women into thinking there's some kind of a game, like the higher you can get your food intake, the better you do and you win. And I've seen a lot of these women come to our company and say, well, my coach made me gain 30 pounds of body fat because he said we were rebuilding my metabolism. And I'm like, yeah, how's that working? Like, is that 30 extra pounds of body fat doing that for you? And it just comes down to not only misinformation, but disinformation and just horrible levels of non-knowledge. But you're right, Alli, in that we have to use food to be healthy. Food is medicine. Food as medicine are a couple phrases that are being tossed around now. And, we get the micronutritional value. We certainly need enough protein, obviously, to rebuild and repair cells. And if you're in a calorie deficit or you're very athletic, then you might need a little bit more. There are definite reasons you want to look at quantity and quality of all the macronutrients, and just not be afraid of any of them. Even the kind of dietary fat we consume can be extremely helpful and healthful, or the opposite. So, as I said, just a lot of things people are unaware of when you look at it just at the surface level.
We're going to interrupt this interview for just a second because we've got something we want to make sure that you know. If you're struggling with your health, with your fitness, if you don't know where to start or you know what to do and you're not doing it, we're here for you.
And all you need to do to get our help is to reach out to Shawna and I at our email, sapodcast23@gmail.com. And we're happy to help and we will be in touch. Now back to the show.
So the big question is how much, when. This is what, this is, I think, why people fall into the meal plan, pigeonhole of just tell me what to eat when, or the diets that are not as healthy or maybe personalized because people need direction. So how does one go figure that out? That's a big question.
Awesome question. And I'm glad you backed us up into something, right at that starting point. So I think you need to look at this as 2 or 3 ways to cross-ply your own deductions or your own assumptions about your metabolism. So first, let me go back to around 1920. I think it was 1918 when Dr. Lulu Peterson first created the advent of tracking calories. She was a physician just over 100 years ago. And it was only about 30 or 40 years prior to that we even biochemically learned what calories were and that we could quantify them in the food we ate. So she was the first person to ever write a book on counting calories. So, it was just like, hey, you have a certain amount of energy your body is going to use per day. If you go over that, you're going to gain weight. If you go below that, you lose weight. Like, we've figured it out. That was the big breakthrough a little more than 100 years ago. So what they found out from then moving forward, and their original estimates all the way back then were still to this day some of the most accurate, in that the average female basal metabolic rate is just under 1,350 calories. So without exercise, without excess NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, without any intentional movement, just the average woman going through her day, if she eats 1,350 calories, that's pure maintenance. For men, it's around 1,650. Now think of what our own FDA has done as a disservice. On every food fact panel, what does it say? It says based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet, which is infinitely higher than most people need from a basal level. Now, we do have to add back in function, the amount of calories we'll use because of intentional exercise or motion. You may be a landscaper working outside 12 hours a day in constant motion. You may work in an Amazon warehouse walking 15 miles a day. You may be sedentary sitting in an office. So when you look at those averages, if you're a female, just say 1,350, that's the average. That's the 50-yard line. That means 49.9% of women are going to have a faster metabolism. It also means 49.9% of women are going to have a slower metabolism. So you may need even fewer calories than 1,350. Then again, you're adding calories into what you're expending above that. But then you have to subtract out. If you're trying to lose weight, lose body fat, now you have to subtract the calorie deficits. So if you just make that assumption that 1,350 is average, now I think the next best place is for you to really test it in your own body. Because there are 8 billion people on the planet, and that means 8 billion unique data set points. I mean, there are going to be that many people who have different metabolisms and metabolic capacity. Imagine there is one person on this planet who objectively has the slowest metabolism on the planet right now. That person is alive, burns the fewest calories of anybody. Somebody's at the other end of the continuum. We're all in between. So if I want to test how many miles per gallon my car gets, I fill up my tank of gas, I set my odometer to 0, and then I, drive that tank of gas. I see how many miles I put on the car. I refill the gas tank and I say, okay, I put in 14.8 gallons, divide the amount of miles by that, and it tells me how many miles per gallon I get. That's what macronutrient and calorie tracking can do for you. if you are tracking your food objectively for a week or two, and you look at the fact that, okay, I averaged 1,604 calories over 2 weeks and I lost 2 pounds. Well, that's good information. You know that at least that amount of calories is a calorie deficit for you. And if we, the biological math isn't linear. You could be using some glycogen, some, stored body fat. You could even lose some amino acids, that sort of thing. But you can eventually fine tune it to the point where I can tell you guys right now, exactly what my metabolism is, because when I track my calories, I know if I'm losing a pound a week, gaining a pound a week, or staying in neutral. So that's just another real value of you testing it yourself.
And a value of logging and tracking, because I think that that's really one of the things that's also challenging in his work that makes it hard to do all, and to be honest about our food when we track.
With yourself.
And with ourselves, or if you have a coach, definitely being honest and not just skipping the days that you don't like what you ate.
Yeah, you know how many clients I have where there's just a day missing, and it's like, well, where's that information? That's just a wash. It wasn't a good day. It's still information we need, because we need to see what your body's doing with that level of calorie intake.
Yeah. And what about the timing of fueling? Like, can we talk about that? And is there anything important about timing? If you are working out, not working out, going to sleep, getting up?
Yeah, there is a lot of mixed research, and I'll give you kind of the high points, and then maybe it's more individualized than we think. But I will say there have been a lot of meta-analyses looking at that. What if I just eat one meal a day, all my calories in one meal? What if I do it in 2 meals a day? What if I do it in 3 meals a day? What if I do it in 8 meals a day? And a lot of this gets into intermittent fasting theory and so forth. And what they really find out is, in aggregate, it really, once you get to about 2 to 3 meals per day minimum, and as high as 5 to 7 meals maximum, it just doesn't matter. But with the caveat, so first of all, let me just wrap up that point. In general, with a very fine margin for error, just the total amount of calories you eat, if you eat it in 3 meals a day or 6 meals a day or anything in between, your results are going to be about the same. But because of our circadian rhythm and the metabolism and how it works innately with our own biology, there are all kinds of good studies showing that when you eat more of your calories early in the day and you eat fewer of your calories later in the day, even comparing isocaloric studies, you just do a lot better by eating earlier in the day. To the tune of sometimes up to 400 or so calories. So for example, even on your own eating behavior, if you give adults and children a higher protein breakfast, a whole food breakfast, they will just naturally eat about 400 calories less that day. If you kind of delay your food intake, you do some intermittent fasting where you think, well, I'm going to wait and not eat till lunch, or I'm going to eat my lunch later in the day. Those people weigh more, they lose weight at a slower pace, and they eat more. So it still behooves us, as you said, Alli, to think of food as fuel, that cliche. And I'm waking up, I've been asleep, I haven't eaten dinner, or I haven't eaten since dinner the night before. And so it's been 8, 10, 12 hours. My body needs some food. This is prime time to really surcharge, so to speak, my metabolism, make it start moving for my body. So now I'm burning more calories for the entire day. And even though that's a little bit old news, and it's been questioned, it's true. It just, research bears it out.
And being in this industry, this is not scientific, but just my experience of how many clients don't eat during the day that are struggling with weight, or don't eat early in the day and eat most of their calories in the evening. That's a trend that I've seen over and over and over. Again, no scientific research here that I'm doing on that, just an observation.
Yeah, and it's as old as time. We get so busy. It's kind of easier to be distracted during the day, and then you get home and you're so hungry. You just don't even realize how many extra calories you're consuming. Instead of like one of the things I do is every afternoon I have a protein shake around 3, knowing I'm going to go home and eat around 5. And I'm just not, instead of hitting the kitchen, starving, grabbing a bag of chips out of the pantry and, while we're cooking dinner, that sort of thing, I'm just chill. I feel great. I can have a small, moderate dinner and I'm fine. And all it took me was having a couple hundred calories earlier in the afternoon and a high quality protein source to delay that. So a lot of those little behavioral tricks are very helpful.
I want to just jump back to the idea of tracking again, and want to highlight that this is what I often talk to about with my clients about the honesty, because at the end of the day, the tracking is not an indication as to whether you're a good or a bad person. It's really just information gathering. And so I think when we put the highlight on that with no judgment, it makes the process a little bit easier, because it can be very intimidating for people to get into. So having said that, what is the best way to get started with tracking?
I have a client, interestingly, who came to me a couple weeks ago. He's around 60 years old and had a history, like, college football player, athlete. He could eat whatever he wanted and, never gain weight. And even later in life, he was a cyclist. He burns a lot of calories. And he did come to me with that supposition, like, Joe, just tell me what to do. Give me the playbook and I'll run the play. I don't want to track food. I don't want to weigh food. I don't want to measure. It's just like, I'm just beyond that. And so I said, okay, as long as we can adhere to a pretty solid meal plan, you're giving up some freedom and flexibility. So we're going to have to err on the side of high structure. So we'll create a good meal plan that you like. And sure enough, as I'm looking at his food logs, every day it's different. He's on the road for his job. He's in and out of his car. I'm like, wait a second. I thought you said you were going to be really consistent. I'm going to give you the playbook and you're going to run the play, right? And so he very quickly realized I need to track food because I just can't be objective otherwise. And none of us can. I invented this method and I cannot lose weight unless I put pencil to paper or fingers to a keyboard. And because you just objectively cannot remember everything. So what I tell people is this is a tool to learn. And yes, just like anything. I mean, if I want to learn to play guitar, I got to take lessons. I can't just wake up one day, pick up a guitar, and it's going to be perfect. If I want to learn a language, if I want to learn a new skill, it just takes some time. So if you are not willing for that entrance, that barrier to entry of tracking your food for a couple of months, then it's just not your time. It's not going to work. And I don't want to waste your time. If you can give yourself 2 or 3 months of tracking and establishing those patterns so that even just heuristically, visually, you can learn, okay, this is what this level of food looks like. If I put a half a cup of rice on the plate, if I weigh a 4-ounce chicken breast, this is what it looks like. Because then you get in the habit of what your meal schedule and timing looks like. You get in the habit of how you feel when you're eating certain foods. You give your physiology, your A1C, your glucose disposal, gluconeogenesis, lipolysis, all of these biochemical things happening that make you better at losing body fat. You give yourself that running start, because I don't want you to track your food forever. I don't weigh and measure my food until I decide, well, I want to lose 5 or 10 pounds, so I'm gonna get that app back out, or I'm gonna get that logbook back out. It's a skill you learn once. It makes you 99% better at it, even without the tool. And then when you need to jump back in with that tool, it's well practiced and it's easier for you. But if you just refuse to do that initially, it's going to be incredibly frustrating and unsuccessful for you forever until you do it.
Amen.
Yeah. And that's what I tell my clients, because there is the resistance and, the thought that it's a sign of disordered eating. But honestly, I equate it to, if you're bankrupt, your accountant would say, let's track where the money's going, where it's being spent. It's nothing different. So if we can kind of take out the emotion, which is very difficult with food, because
Right.
food is way more than fuel, but just to try and disassociate emotion and judgment, and then just look at the numbers and then connect the numbers to what the results are.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I
You
tell
know,
my
there,
clients, it is work and it works.
yeah.
Period.
Well, I'm really glad you brought this up, Shawna, because of course it is more than fuel. Food is part of our culture. Food is part of our family bonding time. Food is social. Food is emotional. A lot of our brain development was centered around food, and we can't change those things. Even our genetics, even our hunger signals from our hypothalamus are physical, they're genetic. And so you mentioned this, you're not a good person or a bad person if you track perfectly or don't track, or any of those value judgments are just off the table when it comes to food and body weight and body image. But you said it perfectly, Shawna, that we have to at least look at the objective components objectively. We could all give analogy after analogy. Well, don't look at your speedometer on the highway. That's too rigid. That's too judgmental. You're gonna get obsessive compulsive disorder by looking at your miles per hour. It's like, no, that's how you know you're not going too fast or you're going too slow. Like, it is what it is. It's objective information. So that's why I try to convince my clients, like, we'll work through some of the emotional things, we'll work through some of the behavioral things, and maybe you even need somebody on that side different than me. I'm not a clinical psychologist, but to work on the objective nutrition and health components, it's just what it is. It's physics and it's math and it's biology.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the messaging that, as we approach 40, 50, 60 and beyond, that our metabolism tanks? Can you speak to that, and maybe the Herman Ponzer study,
Yeah.
which I feel like
Ooh.
is quite liberating. You know,
I'm glad you brought him up because I am friends with one of his lab mates, and I disagree with something that Dr. Ponzer brought out in his book, and I think he missed something incredibly basic. But I'll explain his thesis and his point.
great.
So first of all, I'm 55, and I could easily say yes, life is way different at 55 than 25 in terms of metabolism and so forth. But it is almost exclusively based on our behavior, not our metabolism. Yes, thyroid functionality decreases a little bit. Yes, androgen hormones like testosterone can decrease a little bit. All of that can make 100 or 200 calorie difference. But we're just not creating the same kind of force biologically as we're moving through life. So, for example, I'm working out in an hour, 4 or 5 days a week right now, just like I did when I was 20. The difference is I'm not squatting 500 pounds, I'm squatting 200 pounds. Everything I do right now is physically, biologically less. So I'm simply burning fewer calories, even doing the same activity. And then you get into the actual non-exercise activity. My wife and I raised 4 kids. And so running around, bing, 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 ball field to ball field, this to this to this to this, versus, sitting on the couch. Now my wife and I, we get home and, that's what we do. We're watching TV. Life is just different, and it's not our metabolism. It's literally our movement and our movement force production. So Dr. Ponzer, this is an interesting, I'm going to try not to get too far into the weeds here, but I love that you brought him up. So he's an anthropologist, an evolutionary anthropologist. He's not a biologist. He's not a physiologist. He's an anthropologist. So he studies cultures academically. He looks at cultures in history and he makes assessments and talks about the history and their culture and their sociology. But he's interested in their physical makeup and so forth, especially Herman. He started studying the Hadzen people, a tribal group, and he just thought it was amazing the fact that these people will sometimes walk 20 miles a day. They're hunter-gatherers, or maybe not. Maybe it is 20 miles, maybe 5 miles a day. 20,000 steps, I think it is, like 17,000, 20,000 steps versus we have this Western goal of let's get our 10,000 steps in. And so he thought, oh my gosh, these people, their metabolisms must be insane. Like, we're going to go over there. We're going to do all of these ultrasound tests, these gas chamber tests, metabolic cart tests, and they're going to like great white sharks. They must be burning 10,000 calories a day. And he found out they weren't burning any more calories than us. So he said, and this was his thesis after doing all of these physical tests, that the human genome, our biology, must cap it. For our own survival, we must have this genetic governor that basically just disallows us from burning more calories. But here's why he's dead wrong. Michael Phelps burned 10,000 calories a day because he was swimming 8 hours a day. An Olympic athlete goes through that. So what Dr. Ponzer missed is what's the average weight of the Hadzen, the 40 or 20-year-old male? He's about 115 pounds. What do they do when they're not walking to hunt and gather? They're sitting under a tree. Their lives aren't full of mental stress. They're not running from cubicle to cubicle getting this stuff done. When they are not walking, they are resting. And so they're just efficient. If you or I were at 3% body fat, and even though we were incredibly active, our bodies are just that healthy. We don't need that many calories to move through our day because we are so cardiovascularly healthy. Their average heart rates are in the 20s and 30s, the Hadzen people. They're just that healthy, so they don't need that many calories. So now let's transpose that for a second to a secondary question, which is we tend to think, because influencers tell us this, if you're really healthy, you have a raging metabolism. You want the highest metabolism ever. The highest metabolism is with the most overweight, unhealthy person. Because you're so unhealthy, your heart and lungs are working so hard, orthopedically, you're carrying around all this extra body weight, you will never burn more calories than when you are at your unhealthiest and heaviest. That's not the goal. The goal is not to have the fastest metabolism, because that is also the fastest aging and the fastest path toward death. You want to be like a Hadzen tribes person with a 25 resting heart rate, and you burn the fewest amount of calories possible because you're so freaking lean and healthy, your body doesn't need to be overworked. So I know that's a long answer, and I told you I would try to not make it too complicated, but I think that end point is the most important, is we want to work to the point where we're the healthiest and the leanest and the cardiovascularly most efficient. And ironically, that means our metabolism is going to be slower.
So now I'm going to ask the question again, because I wouldn't say that as women are approaching their 40s and 50s and 60s, that they are their healthiest version of themselves. Like, there's some that are.
And more joint problems slow us down. I was thinking, like, what slows us down? Things
Right.
that, yeah.
Yeah. So can you address that?
Yeah, and it goes back to the same category of explanation in that you're right. I had a foot injury that I just had to have surgery for a few months ago, and for the last 4 years, I have not been able to run or jump. That's a huge hit to my functional metabolism. My basal metabolic rate is largely unchanged because I'm the same person going through my same day. But absolutely, orthopedic issues, joint issues, that just again means that we're burning fewer calories, even doing the same amount of work or exercise. And in our 40s and 50s, let's say we have women approaching even perimenopause and menopause, you're going to have cyclical changes in those androgen hormones, which can increase or decrease your metabolism. And it is what it is. I mean, you can maybe be tested by your OBGYN or your endocrinologist for what those hormones are doing, but it's not going to change the fact that you're probably going to see one thing or the other. You can become kind of hyper or hypothyroid through that period of time. And so your assessment of how you're doing, is your hunger changing? Is your sleep changing?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of women are now getting lower quality sleep. And we know that the less you sleep at night, the more you eat during the day. One study showed if you get 5 hours or less per sleep at night, you have a 67% increased chance of gaining weight, because your brain is just misconstruing, that need for sleep energy as well. We just need more sugar, more carbs. That'll pick us up, which is kind of a wrong biological cue interpretation. But that's why I think when we start hitting the 40s and the 50s and we see weight accumulation, it should be that we're not complaining that our metabolism isn't what it used to be. Just accept that we're going to use fewer calories, and so we have to adjust by either intentionally increasing more. That's maybe when you get out your step counter and you're trying to really get your activity up. Or you have to compensate a little bit with a change in food intake.
One thing we also hear about, especially with perimenopause, menopause, is cortisol. And so can you speak to, does that have any kind of impact? And if so, what?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about cortisol now, the stress hormone, and it's still a little bit of a cliche to talk about adrenal stress, fatigue, and that sort of thing. And in reality, it still comes back to sleep and in part stress management. Because when we are stressed, we become systemically more inflammatory prone. And that's when our body burns body fat less efficiently. We tend to store body fat more easily just because of cortisol. There's a lot of fluctuation between your body in fight or flight syndrome, where your body is kind of preparing for fight or flight, and then all of a sudden that glycogen and those lipids that you have liberated in your body, they have to be restored, and so you're kind of fluctuating back and forth. But it still just really comes down to understanding your own mental health status. If you do feel like you're super stressed and life is running you ragged, then addressing those issues. What do you need help with? What kind of changes do you need in your life that can bring that stress down?
And things that can stress is something, if you're having more joint issues or more pain and you're living in pain every day, and then you're not getting as much sleep, and it's kind of that perfect storm. And then you don't feel good, and your stress level goes up, and then your eating goes up. And
I was working with a neurosurgeon in the last couple of years who changed his entire philosophy of medicine toward the inflammatory process of mostly mental health, but certainly some physical health and nutrition, in the fact that regardless what you have, what condition, what injury, any kind of unmitigated stress and anxiety will create more pain. And the more pain you have, the less you're probably going to exercise, and you're not going to sleep as well. And it does become that vicious cycle. And he has really revolutionized, his work with some patients in just saying, look, we need to get you, thinking about how to improve your mental state of mind. And it's not just meditation, but a lot of just your thought patterns. And all of a sudden, with the help of neuroplasticity, your brain is literally changing and remodeling itself in better ways. 6 months later, these people, without any other changes, all their pain is gone. That they had this injury, this post-surgical intervention problem they were having, and not even addressing those physical issues, just their mental anxiety and therefore systemic inflammation. and then all the pain goes away.
Sounds like a good guest for Girls Talk Healthy Aging.
And if I could just mention that, cortisol really gets a bad rap, and there are influencers that are suggesting that there's supplements you can use to reduce cortisol, and cortisol is actually not a bad thing. It's the chronic cortisol with the lack of sleep, with the increased stress. And cortisol is just a natural result of any kind of workout. And it's fine. When your cortisol is elevated from a workout, it's fine. It's when it's elevated all the time that it's not fine. And could you speak about that?
Yeah, it's so the amount of adrenaline perhaps that you think about in a workout, like you start thinking ahead of time, this is going to be the great workout. I can't wait to get in the gym. I'm going to do this and that. And then you hit those points of fatigue and you're breathing hard and you're working out, muscle strain and all that stuff. Yes, you're causing cortisol to increase, which is then your body's signal to adapt, to get stronger, to get healthier, to get more resilient. So without cortisol, you would not have those progressive adaptive responses. But when you're in that state of high adrenaline, high anxiety all day long, just because of mental stimulus and interpretation, then you're running your body into the ground, because it's not meant for chronicity like that. It's that stimulus for your body to improve, but too much all day long, and you'll just degrade your body into the ground.
I have some clients that are not interested in reducing stress or increasing sleep, and they're wondering why they can't lose weight. And
Absolutely.
So sometimes it's just like, just get some more sleep.
Well, it kind of gets back into that study I mentioned, where if you get 5 hours or less of sleep, you have a 67% chance of being obese. That is chronic cortisol. That's just it's 100% what that is.
And people
Can we
just
talk about
so hard when maybe working less is better.
Right.
I was going to say, can we talk about protein? Because that's a question for women. Like, are women getting enough? Is that something that's important, especially as we get in our 40s and 50s and even younger? Can you speak about protein?
Yeah, interestingly, you at the end of your sentence talked about getting older. And as we get older, our ability to absorb protein declines a little bit. And so at a time when logically you might think, well, if I'm 70 or 80 or 90 years old, I'm not, quote, working as hard. And so I don't need to repair muscle tissue quite as well and so forth. But because your body just doesn't assimilate it as easily, then some people in our older generations are actually protein deficient, and they need to consume more. But this is a place you kind of have one opinion or the other in our culture. A lot of people think that we just don't get enough protein. The average person doesn't get enough. We really probably do. It's the fact that we just have too many calories because of extra carbs and fat. But if you're going to have a restrained, responsible diet where your calorie intake is what you need it to be for maintenance and good health, then you might find that your protein intake is less than optimal. So we have the RDA, which is basically how much protein you need to not die. And the Protein Council and all of the research now shows, matter of fact, it's in total agreement that about 2 times the RDA is best for the average person. So the RDA, I'm sitting here at about 180 pounds. So the RDA of protein for me, if you calculated it as 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, I would need about 65 or so grams of protein. So that would be the RDA, recommended daily allowance. And truly, if I had 65 grams, that would keep me alive. I have done this test on myself multiple times with body composition testing. If I get up to about 125 grams a day, that's when I regain any lost muscle mass. My lean body mass comes back up, and I am optimal. If I go up to 150, 175, 200 grams of protein a day, my lean body mass doesn't change. But as soon as I go below 125, which is 2 times the RDA, I literally start losing lean body mass, which means I'll probably lose bone mass and so forth. So again, all of the research agrees that about 2 times the RDA is really important baseline. It also shows that up to 3 times the RDA can be helpful for people who are super, super active, high metabolically, maybe in a calorie deficit, all of the above. And so, anywhere from the RDA, which is you're probably going to survive, to 2 times the RDA, which is optimal for most of us, to 3 times the RDA, sometimes for some people, that gives you a pretty wide range. And so I teach coaches who are working with clients nutritionally, 2 times the RDA is kind of aspirational. That's a good place to target. But if somebody's getting 1.5 times or 1.25, just, let them see where they can tolerate it, see how much better they can feel, maybe get them up there slowly. Maybe not even every day needs to be that high, but a couple days a week where you're kind of catching up on amino acid needs, because we store amino acids in our liver and our bloodstream and our muscle tissue. But it is an important, probably the most important macronutrient to at least make sure you're getting enough of consistently.
And it's one of those that I find clients are the most confused about, as far as when I look at food logs and I asked a client to label, is it a protein, a carb, or a fat? That is one that is mislabeled more than any of the other. So what I find is ladies overestimate their protein intake when they're really getting very little because of foods that they, in their mind, they think are proteins. And I don't know if there's something you can speak to here that would help our listeners as far as, and without them and this is why tracking and understanding macros that we know is so important, because that's what it teaches you. You learn the math and you learn how to discern yourself. But
yeah, you're right. And when you get back to the basics of the average person, they think, cheese is protein. So if I have 1 ounce of cheese, I've had protein. Well, yeah, maybe you had 6 or 7 grams, not, far from
much better source of fat.
Yeah. Or you're right. Or like, hey, peanut butter is a protein, right? So I had a tablespoon of peanut butter.
Yes. It's not, listeners, it's not a protein.
You're looking at, an animal protein source like chicken, fish, eggs, that sort of thing. If you're going to include something like dairy, like low-fat cottage cheese or Greek yogurt, look at the serving size, make sure you're getting the amount you need. And then digestively, that may not be your best bet. But, a protein source is harder to get in because it's the hardest to prepare. You're literally going to be in the kitchen cooking something probably. It's harder to store and transport around. It's certainly not the most fun thing to eat. If I'm sitting here, eating I like a good steak or a well-prepared chicken breast or something, but it's more fun to eat a bowl of Cheerios or something, just easier to eat. So for the average person who's not a complete foodie or nutrition nut, you really do have to probably pay some attention to, am I getting enough protein in daily, weekly, consistently?
If a woman is listening and she's just wanting like some first steps, I think you gave some on protein, but what are some other things? Like she could start today, tomorrow, like I'm going to make some changes to my food. Where would you recommend maybe they look at what they're doing, or would you recommend certain snacks or mini meals or meals that they could start with to get going?
Yeah, just the way you asked that question, Allie, made me think of when I was getting started. And at 18 years old, I went into the military, away from home for the first time ever. I'm living on this military base, and I actually was living in an apartment off of this military base. And all of a sudden, at 18 years old, I find myself completely autonomous and grown up, and I get to make my own decisions. And I'm walking through a grocery store, for the first time. Like, what do I buy? Like, I don't even know. Like, I've never not been fed. I mean, how do I do this for myself now? And so you start creating those habits like, oh, I think, here's some frozen broccoli. I know that's good. Here's a bag of apples. I should probably have those for snacks. And I think we can overcomplicate it by trying to think through all of these complex diets and watching YouTube videos and so forth. If you just think, okay, the average person, breakfast, lunch, dinner, maybe a snack or two, I I qualitatively want to be healthy. So what are some of my lower fat, healthier versions of foods? Some of these things we just know culturally, innately, we have that information. And then even if you're not wanting to, or you're not at that step to track macros and calories and so forth, um, at least create those patterns of eating. Maybe just journal what you're eating, like I'm having this for breakfast and so forth, and on and down the line, and measure your progress. Are you losing weight? Are you increasing your exercise? Those are the kind of things that you just put one foot in front of the other, one step at a time, and you will figure it out. That's for my intuitive eating crowd. You have interoceptive cues. Your body will tell you when you're hungry, when you're full, and if you learn to pay attention to those and you're looking at quality, those are some of those first steps before you even have to open up podcasts and open up books and learn about nutrition.
It's so interesting that we eat for our entire lives, but many of us are just so unaware of what we're eating. And I would agree wholeheartedly with first step as creating an awareness of what your intake is, and then connecting that dot with, hey, how am I feeling? What's my energy? Am I tired? Did I get through the afternoon? Was I hungry an hour later? Just starting to create awareness, and then starting to look back, well, oh, I just had pasta. Maybe that looks like it's a carb. Maybe what if I threw some fat or some protein on that? How would that affect? So you could use yourself as a guinea pig, but really just opening your eyes to what your current intake is. Because I often tell my clients, you're probably doing a lot of things right. You don't have to start completely over. So
yeah, I know. I remember, going back to me being 18 before I had any nutrition education. I just remember making decisions like that. Well, oatmeal for breakfast sounds better than Fruit Loops or Lucky Charms. I should do that. Maybe skim milk is better than 2% milk. Maybe rice and potatoes are better in that form than French fries through the drive-through. And I honestly made massive, massive changes in my athletic performance, in my body composition, and my health just by eating healthily without any of this quantitative information. And only then, of course, when I got my first doctorate in nutrition and all that, did I really start kind of breaking it down for very specific reasons. But a lot of us can go a long way just by doing what we know is right and healthy.
What's one of your favorite go-to meals that's simple, healthy, and yummy?
It's my every day. It's my favorite. I take about a fourth of a cup of Greek yogurt, just non-fat Greek yogurt, a scoop of protein powder, and just a tiny bit of water. So I mix it up into like a pudding consistency. I'll put a half a cup of granola, and I will chop up an apple, and I eat that post-workout every morning, and it is like a dessert. And honestly, I'm not eat. I mean, then I don't eat for 4.5, 5 hours until lunch, because it's a solid 35, 40 grams of protein, probably 50 to 60 grams of carbs, which can sound like a lot, but I just trained. That's my post-workout meal, and I'm now going to not eat until lunch. But that is as fast, as easy. From the time I start making that, eat it, and clean up my dishes, it's 15 minutes and I'm on the road.
if you had a wish for our listeners, what would it be?
Oh, gosh, now I'm going to have to come kind of full circle. I will go back to our beginning conversation about being patient and just taking the time to learn enough about nutrition so that you don't have to worry about it for the rest of your life. As we just summarized here, how it doesn't have to be complicated. The reason I can make that decision about Greek yogurt and granola and protein powder and an apple is because I know exactly what's in it, and I like the quality of it, and I've experimented with it, and I know the quantity is right for my body. I had to learn that objectively somewhere, so now it's just cruise control. I no longer have to think about it. If I could get everybody listening to realize you can put in 2 or 3 months of decent work. You don't have to obsess about it every second of the day, but it has to be a main priority for 2 or 3 months. Then you will not have to worry about it the rest of your life, and you can enjoy much easier, carefree health forever because you put in that initial bit of work.
That's tough to follow up with a wish. My wish would be that y'all listen to this podcast and listen to Dr. Joe.
And my wish is that people would eat with more intention and educate themselves a little bit about what they're putting in their mouths. Because as you said, Dr. Joe, once you start to understand what you're eating, then health issues melt away more easily.
Thanks for listening. You'll find me, Alli, on Instagram at Alli Curve Fitness.
And you'll find me, Shawna, on Instagram at Shawna Klemczewski. Feel free to pop us a DM with questions and or feedback. If you're enjoying the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, please subscribe and share it with other health-minded women. Ratings and reviews are also much appreciated and help us get our message out to a larger audience.
Until next time, be healthy and be happy.